All right, everyone. Hello, and welcome to today's ISTE Expert Webinar. I'm Lauren Coker, Community Manager at ISTE, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. I'd like to point out first that the chat and Q&A buttons are at the bottom of your screen. In the chat, you can introduce yourself to other attendees and discuss the webinar. If you have a question for a presenter or a technical question, you can share it via the Q&A box or in the chat. We'll be monitoring both the whole time. I'll also be recording today's presentation, which will be shared out afterwards with registrants and on ISTE.org. Please stay until the end to fill out a short survey to let us know what webinar topics you're interested in. Today's presentation is A Seat at the Table, Diversity in EdTech, presented by Desiree Alexander of the ISTE Digital Equity Network, with panelists Tutul Natoya, Natalia Lemoyne Hernandez, Alicia Johal, and Santi Karasamy. Without further ado, take it away, Desiree.
Hello, everyone. My name is Desiree Alexander, and I will be your moderator for today. I am the founder CEO of Educator Alexander Consulting, and I am the regional director of North Louisiana for APEL. And you can see my Twitter handle is @EducatorAlex, and my email is desiree@educatoralexander.com.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalia Lemoyne Hernandez, and I am the coordinator for instructional technology at the Gilbert Central School District in New York. I'm also a former ESL teacher, and I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for coming here.
Hi everyone, my name is Alicia Johal. I am a 7th and 8th grade science teacher from San Diego, California.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Tutul Natoya. I'm an instructional coach, and I'm here in beautiful, sunny Southern California, Los Angeles area.
Hey, everyone. I'm Santi Karasamy, also from New York, founder of Project Recess EdTech Consulting.
Okay, and I forgot to say where I'm from. I am in Shreveport, Louisiana, so I think I'm the only one that's not either on the East or West Coast. So we are going to go ahead and get started today talking about diversity in EdTech and what that truly means. And you can definitely put questions and comments in the panel. in the chat, and we will be looking at that. So the first question I want to give to the panel is, what does having a seat at the table actually mean to you?
I'd like to start and say that to me, it means having a presence and having a voice. Especially when at the table, there are other, powerful powers that be. So it is, to me, that's what it means, that I have, presence and voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And to build off that, I think it's having the privilege of having an audience that will listen to you and will make decisions based on what you say and what you believe in.
And for me, I think as I've had more experience in the classroom, I think that having a seat at the table also makes you feel empowered, so that you are sharing your voice, like Natalia said, and they are listening, like Santi said, but it's that extra element of people highly respecting the perspective that you bring to the table. So I think with the opportunity comes a sense of responsibility of everyone at the table to acknowledge who is sitting at the table.
Yeah, and for me, it means being in the room when important decisions are made and when folks are talking about what the next moves are, and you being able to lend your voice to that and not being absent. So when things roll out in real time, that that you were able to make an impactful decision that'll impact everyone, not just the folks who may have been in the room without you.
Agreed. I'd like to add to what Alicia just said about the perspective that you bring, and that is really important. And the fact that you are giving a place at the table, like Alicia said, it gives you the empowerment, and it also to me, it means that whatever I'm going to say, I should feel confident saying it because I feel like I'm going to be heard. So the fact that you have a seat at the table makes you feel as an individual that you are valued.
And I want to jump in. I agree with that, when we even talk about the table, what does that truly mean? And it means that that canon, that, in any type of profession, and of course we're talking about ed tech, that canon of people that everybody trusts, that everybody goes to, those are the people that are at the table. And to say that you have a seat at the table, I feel like validates the work that you're doing. Just like you said, you feel more valued. It validates that your voice is actually can be considered an expert voice, that it's not just a voice on the side, but that actually you have a seat at that table as an expert.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at the chat here, and I really like something that James Starks said, that it means being an ambassador for our students. I couldn't agree more. It really is important to first obviously have the opportunity to be at that table, and also always keep in mind that you are an advocate for your students and that you can always be their voice too.
And I love that comment too, Natalia. I was actually going to say something about that. I think all of us have, best intentions in mind. And as we have a seat at the table, we should bring that with us, and that we can advocate for the needs of our students. And the closer we are to the classroom and where the rubber meets the road, I think the more advocacy we could bring to this proverbial table and make sure that whatever our students need is advocated for.
Absolutely. And I think this all relates to this idea of diversity of perspectives. In some of my sort of dealings with EdTech companies, you'll see the ones that succeed and the ones that aren't as successful when you look at who's in charge of the product. Do they have experience? Do they have sort of these dealings with students? And do they have their best interest in mind? And I think the same goes with schools. When you have more experience working with students and even teachers and understanding what their needs are, you can be an advocate for them, and I think it works out for the best.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Santi said hits on a big point. As a current classroom teacher, I am very aware of when a teacher's input has been involved in a decision-making process in what's happening around me. And so it's very, I think it's very easy to call on the same people to sit at the table, all the time. And so I would urge people that are watching and participating, especially if they are, administrators or leadership, to think about, every voice that represents every stakeholder group that you have, in the system. So if you're thinking about a school or a district, everybody's voice needs to be there, because it's really clear when the outcome of these meetings happen, whether or not everyone was there or not, and if certain things were forgotten about or not mentioned. So I think it's really valuable to pause and sit if you're planning a meeting and think about, who you're inviting and the purpose, and who you may need to encourage to invite, because I think that sometimes teachers are asked to attend certain meetings or having the seat at the table. But sometimes we might think, well, I don't know, I don't really know a whole lot about, that thing that you're talking about. But I think that's even more reason to have teachers there, is because we need to have access to these conversations that impact our students the most.
And I would build on that and say it's important to have diverse teachers there, and have teachers, like you said, that not only represent the stakeholders that are, a part of the school, but also represent just our world in general, to have those different viewpoints and to have those different voices at the table can lead to different decisions being made.
I think also something to keep in mind is sometimes you won't be invited to the table, right? But going along the lines of what Alicia was saying, sometimes you have to invite yourself, because if you're not invited, you need to be there. Right?
I agree with Santi. I was just going to say, I like one of the comments from Carol Mahoney, I think. Yes, I know as when I was a teacher too, I felt like I was not invited to those meetings or to those conversations, but I agree with what Santi say. You have to try to advocate a little bit for your students, your families, and for yourself too. So be that squeaky wheel maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, and I think Alicia kind of touched on this, may feel that we have nothing to say, we have nothing to contribute. But, you know, I think having that presence there, and you never know how much of a perspective you have until you're actually at the table and you hear the conversations that are having and you're lending your own unique point of view and how important that point of view becomes. So I think Santi's right, kicking in the door and making sure you're at the table so you can be impactful to the decisions that are happening at the school.
Yeah. And not first, and then you can kick down the door.
And I think that whole idea of when teachers think that, okay, I shouldn't be a part of that meeting, or I'm not sure if I should have a seat at that table, I think that is the outcome of not being invited to the conversations that we were supposed to be at, right? So if I wasn't invited to the last two, you know, they must be talking about something that I have no input on. And so it starts to affect you more as a teacher because you're wondering, well, they didn't really need me there the first time, and now I know the meeting is happening again, so do I just show up? And we kind of psych ourselves out. I know I've done that. So I think it's one of those, I know we're going to get to this later, but, you know, like trying to encourage that empowerment of teachers and diverse teachers to make their way into these meetings if they have to.
So that kind of leads us to our second question, which is, if you are that diverse educator or educators with diverse backgrounds, how do you find those opportunities? How do you find the tables to kick your way into? How do you do that if you're not already at the table? You may not get all of the information. How do you find it? How do you kick down the door? You know, how do I do that?
I think you have to connect with educators that are actively kicking down the doors or have done it before. You know, I think that the reason that I met all of you on this panel is one of those opportunities where I was able to follow in the path of diverse educators who are actively kicking down doors and who've been there, you know. And so I'm in my 7th year of teaching, relatively new to teaching. And so I, at some point, knew that I needed to connect with the right people who could help guide me into these opportunities to have a seat at the table. So I think networking is a huge piece. You have to find those groups out there that have the same passion and focus and that drive to be a part of the conversations. And you ask for their support, which I think is the reason that I can even sit on this panel in the first place.
Yeah, and Alicia, I remember when I started teaching, the internet, this was like back in 2000, 2001, you know, internet was around, but it wasn't like it is now. And it was so much harder to build that network. But now with Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and Google+, there's so many different avenues that you can meet people and learn and be in conversations on a national level. So when you hear these things pop up at your own school site, you feel empowered to say, hey, I'm kind of a part of this conversation nationally. Let me bring this back to my own site and give my own perspective based on what I'm hearing from my peers. And I think that gives us, and like you said, you guys alone being a part of you guys just helps me in my advocacy when I go and talk to other folks that, yeah, here's what's happening based on, you know, what I'm hearing from different folks from around the country. And it gives me more confidence to kind of go and knock lightly before I kick down the door for, you know, to get my seat.
Yeah, I think this is an amazing time we're living in, technologically speaking, where it's easier to connect with people, right? I'm not the most active Twitter person, but when I'm on there, I see that, man, you can really connect with amazing, you know, researchers, teachers, and whomever. So just like looking for anything, you can find it by going online and using these communities that exist.
I think to build on what you were saying, Santi, I think also as an individual, and as an educator, there's two things in here. So as an individual, you have to have the skill of being observant and seeing how the systems work, and how can you strike with the more power, I guess, or in understanding how the systems work, and then being able to connect and network, like Alicia was saying too. As an educator, using Twitter, like Santi was saying, is also very important. But in my personal experience, finding EdTech opportunities took some time, because I was not knowledgeable in the avenues that I had to be able to connect with other people and to learn more. So I would strongly encourage those who are listening, or any teacher really, to don't be afraid and go out there. And I know a lot of people don't like social media, but I have to be honest, and I learned a lot and connected with a lot of people through social media. And I learned a lot of different opportunities, and because I learned about those opportunities in social media, I was able to participate in those. And then again, because of my knowledge as an individual, seeing how the systems work, I was able to say, okay, I can go to this conference, or I can go to this event, and I can work things in a way that will benefit me, and that will also make a big impact when I come back to my district. I hope that makes sense.
And I want to pull two things I'm seeing in the chat and kind of throw it to the panel. One is Albert made a point that I definitely wanted to bring up, and that is, if you cannot find EdTech opportunities, or you feel like you may be not being invited or not being able to find it because you may have that diverse background, that it's important that we can't forget to build our own opportunities. And that's something that Albert brought up. And another thing he brought up, and Peggy agreed with, is that we need to talk more about what diversity means, that it's not just race, it's not just culture, just discussing what that means. So I want to throw both of those out to the panel about what does diverse backgrounds really mean, and what about building those opportunities for yourself?
Yeah, I don't know who, and I'm trying to see who, or maybe it was Albert. I think in this day and time, it's easy. It's easier to be able to really build your own network of people, and have that network of people, and there's a diversity of thoughts, diversity of different experiences, and I think that diversity is what really helps you grow as a professional. And I know being on Twitter and being on Voxer has been probably the best professional developments I've ever had. And just because there's a bunch of people who come together and they say, let's try X, and I try it. And just because I tried it, I feel more confident, and that makes me a little bit of an expert. And then I have people who I'm connected to now for, other things, conferences, to be speakers, keynote speeches, things like that. So I think it's important that we think about that networking piece again, and think about how to diversify those group of people that we have in our own network, so that we can have a good feel for what's out there and what folks are saying in the field.
Yeah, Desiree, I'm so glad you highlighted those comments from our audience in terms of diversity. So I grew up in a big city. I grew up in Chicago. I live in New York now. So when I think education, I think urban education. And something I don't think about as much as I should is education in rural environments. So I think that adds to this idea of diversity. And I mean, there's a lot of resources out there, as we said, Twitter, where I can, see what's going on with people who are active in these networks, where I can better myself as an educator. And also, Peggy mentioned the difference of introverts versus extroverts. And I think I love that that's part of the conversation, because I believe people are talking about these differences more, which I love. I consider myself an extrovert, and I've realized my closest friends are introverts, right? And I think this balance of energy works well in these environments, especially in school. And it's interesting to know who are we close with, and how do they balance ourselves out.
When I think about diversity, the word, 4 words come to my head. One is understanding, respect, compassion, and kindness. And I think those words support, or are those the pillars of understanding what diversity or being diverse is. I have to be, and empathy, sorry. I have to be able to culturally understand one of the families of my students, for example. I have to be able to respect somebody else's opinion on something. So I think those, to me, are important to note when we talk about diversity.
And I think the only thing I would add is that I'm thinking about my students right now. I'm also sitting in my classroom, so it's easy to think about them, you know. And I'm thinking that if you were to look at my classroom, my school is located about 3 miles from the border of Mexico. So yes, a lot of my students look a similar way, speak the same languages, come from similar family backgrounds, but even within our population of students at our school, there's a diversity in experience. And so I keep thinking about experience as diversity. It's like, what experiences has this child gone through, both positive, negative, and neutral. The morning before they walk into your classroom, there's an array of different things that have happened. Someone dropped their child off. Someone dropped their little sister off to school. Someone, slept through their alarm. Someone had to, take 2 buses to get to school. Someone had to cross the border and come to school. So it's just this when we're talking about the definition of diversity, I keep going back to experiences, because I feel like that is where you get to the juicy stuff in these conversations, is the different experience that each person brings in, regardless of their race or their background or the language that they speak. And so I think that there's something to say about getting to know people more, getting to know our students better, getting to know our teachers better, getting to know our colleagues better, to figure out what experiences do they have that they're bringing to the table that also makes this meeting diverse.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because in a class that I'm taking, we're talking about global cultures and how to deal with that in the workplace. And I can constantly keep bringing up, just because you learn about a culture doesn't mean you know all the people in that culture. We all have different experiences. We all have, even within a culture, there's many cultures. And, it's like you can't read a book about a culture and say, oh, okay, I got it. I know how to deal with you. No, it's about building that relationship. It's about learning that person as an individual, and learning that culture can help you understand maybe some of that person's actions, or some of that person, what they may be dealing with at a family point or anything like that. But you don't know that person just because you've read a book about that culture, or you've learned about that culture. Even if you went to live in that culture, you still don't know me. So I love that you brought that up. Those relationships and those experiences truly make a person. Any other final comments on this question? Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is from a leader's perspective. I've actually had leaders tell me, you know what, I want to hire more diverse people, I just can't find them. They're not out there, or they're not skilled enough, or they're just not there. So how can leaders find diverse voices?
I think it's a matter of your value, and if you value diverse points of view, you're going to find folks who have a diverse point of view. And kind of speaking to that last question, in terms of diversity, a lot of us talk about diversity and wanting to be in diverse places, and it becomes a poster, a Twitter post, maybe something that someone puts on their website. But then when it comes time to really do the work that it takes to be a diverse organization, that's when we find the lack. And there's a bunch of excuses that come up. But if you really value that diversity, and that I'm lacking in diversity in this area, that becomes a part of the organization that's valued. And if you value it, then you put it at the forefront, and it'll happen.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree with you. I think it's driven from here, from what you really want ultimately for your students. Because if we have leaders that are actually thinking about their students, then they're going to find role models that will help those students. And if you have a diverse population, and we were talking about here that being diverse is not just about race or ethnicity, but if you are a leader and you think about the outcome and the end goal, which is your students, then I truly believe what you said, Tutul, that it has to come from within and have that intention to find that. And I would assume too that leaders will have to go into networks just like educators do.
Mm-hmm.
More educators that are diverse.
Yeah, to echo what Natalia was saying, I think leaders need to be sincere in their search of where to find talent. The talent is there. I think that's a myth that doesn't exist. It's there. You just have to refine your search and be true to it, and really find it. In terms of this idea of diversity, you just have to be sincere in the search.
Mm-hmm.
I would just agree with what Santi said. If you can't find the diverse voices, then you're probably not looking hard enough. If I as a like a younger teacher of color that's new to the profession can connect with educators that are diverse and that have a wide array of backgrounds and cultures and experiences and languages and personality types, like if I can seek them out, then you can too. And then I think another thing that leaders have to think about is yes, you can find them, but then you also have to make sure that they stay, because I have been thinking about that more often is when you don't feel like the organization that you're with, like you don't feel like you're heard. I think that's an issue too with diverse educators and leaders. And so I want to just think of this question as twofold. Yes, find them, but then also, how do we keep them and value them and appreciate them and make sure that they are then drawing in more diverse perspectives, and not making it feel like it's a silo.
Alicia's out of school, and that's a legit
You
And we're keeping an eye out on her.
Yes, yeah. Props to her for doing this out of school.
We have a comment in the chat box about Peggy wanted to hear some comments about strategies to bring people into the conversation. How do you be inclusive? And I think it was Santi. Santi that brought up the companies being sincere and looking for how do you do that? If I am I'm Black, I have all Black people around me, how do I go and find other people? If I'm white, I have all white people around, how do I go and find other people? Like, how do I do that? How do I bring people into the conversation? How do I do that without appearing fake? Without appearing like that's the only reason I'm going to talk to you is because you are diverse. I mean, how do I do that in a genuine and sincere way?
Desiree, I think it starts with being introspective, because you have to be introspective to understand, to even realize that your entire staff looks a certain way. And let's be honest, if the staff is all white men, you have to be able to look at yourself and say, wow, this staff is, I've got a lot of white men at the table. How do I diversify that? And then that leads you to, okay, what more do I need? I work a lot in STEM spaces. And one of the biggest things that's starting to become evident to me is the lack of women and women voices in the STEM fields. So if, I'm a leader and I'm in a room and it's full of guys and we're all talking about how to diversify and there are no women at the table, that's my first sign that I should maybe go out and find some qualified people. And then I've got to diversify the pool of my own network so I can go out there and say, hey, I'm not even looking for, but hey, you look like a fantastic candidate. Alicia, can you come to our meetings on Tuesdays? Actively seek out those opportunities to bring people to the table. And I think as leaders, those opportunities are there. We just need to be able to be introspective, know what's needed, and then go out and actively look for those people in your building, in the district, in your own network that may be able to help fill that void and bring them into the fold too.
I agree. And I want to give you an actual example of a personal experience. As you know, I'm the director of technology in my district. And as director of technology, I am supposed to create the technology plan for the district that it needs to be turned to the state, right? It was, to me, you have to start with the end in mind, okay? The end in mind is serve our students to better prepare them for the future, right? So I can't do that alone. If I'm a leader in this district and I know that my end goal is to serve the students, I need to intentionally make changes to my systems and to my routines and to the protocols so that I get to that end and to that goal. So when I started drafting the technology plan, I said, I need voices. I need other people in my district to come and help me build this plan, where we want to go as a district and what we want our students to learn with technology. So I ended up intentionally inviting people, and I sent it out to obviously all the administration and leaders and whatnot, but I intentionally sent it out to teachers, to all the staff. And staff was really, and I sent it out to teachers and I said, I want you to bring a +1. So I sent them a little invite and everything, like a little party invite with bring a +1. And I want you to be intentional in choosing who you want to bring to this party. So I wanted to do that because I knew that I couldn't do it alone and that it would not be fair to our student population for me to sit here with just a small group of people writing this plan. So I think, as you guys were saying, being intentional as a leader to bring diverse voices into the conversation, it's really, really important.
Yeah, I think I echo all these things by saying it takes self-awareness to realize you need diversity in the first place, and also checking your ego to ask for help on how to find this. I think that's a difficult thing, even for myself, to admit that you need help finding something and going to someone and asking what they suggest, be it other experts or other groups. But yeah, checking your ego and having that self-awareness.
And I think I'm thinking about being on the receiving end of this conversation. And I think that, when you are new to the profession or you have a different perspective, or this is the first time you're being invited in, you might say no. I did that in my early years. I wasn't sure I was supposed to be a part of certain conversations and backed away. And so I would want a leader in that position to encourage me and empower me, right? So set that role model mentorship up so that, yes, you want me to be at the table, but I also might need you to tell me why you need me at the table, why my perspective is valued, why by me coming, it's going to help the meeting, go better. So I think that might be something too, as leaders are thinking about approaching more diverse voices who may have not been invited before. They might put an unintentional, guard up and say, oh, I don't know if I should be there. So I think the encouragement and the empowerment, and let them know why you want them there, why you need them there, why they matter. And I think that's what we do with our students. I want you to come to my after school club. I want you to be here every day at school. This is what you mean to our class. That kind of stuff works for adults as well.
I totally agree, Alicia. I actually, that resonated so much with me, because that's exactly what happened when I sent these invites to the staff. They're like, wait, why do you want me there? So you're absolutely right on the money. As a leader, you have to encourage them, say, listen, your voice is valued, and I really would love to learn more about it, and I would love to, put that into practice, whatever you have to say, because I think it's important.
Yeah, that rationale is important, isn't it? Like giving the rationale for why it is that we need you at the table. I think that's important for all those involved, and to know that I value what you bring to the table and we need you here.
And I love that, because I think anyone from a diverse background, we already talked about diversity is more than just race and culture and ethnicity, but anyone from a diverse background, I think we've all felt tokenism. And we've all felt, well, am I here just because I fit these boxes? Am I here just because I'm a woman and I'm Black and I'm this and I'm that? And, you know, am I just checking boxes, or am I here because you want me here because I'm valued? So I think that is very, very crucial. We are going to mosey on to our last question, because I really think this is important to get to, and it is, do you feel like you have a seat at the table? What is your story? Why are you here? How did you get here on this webinar? So do you have a seat at the table? What do you think for your personal story?
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Totul, go ahead.
Thank you, Santi. You know, I think I didn't feel like I had a seat at the table for a long time, and I felt as though decisions were being made to me, and, you know, you really didn't have any say in what happens. But as I started to expand my network and I started to talk to more people, and I started to see how I can influence or impact real important conversations, I think that gave me a lot more confidence in knowing that I could have a seat at the table. And then I started to realize how important it is when you become, you know, you start to get in more leadership positions, you start to see how important your voice actually is in kind of navigating and helping to craft the decisions that are made, what's happening. So I think based on my, you know, my growing network, like everyone here who's on this panel is that you guys are part of my network, believe it or not, but you guys are part of my network, and my growing network is allowing me to see that I can impact change and I can have a seat at the table. And all it is just a conversation, a phone call, an email, and just kind of show up. Like, I'm really good at just showing up at things. If there's a meeting, oh, I'll be there because it's important. So I think I do. I just feel like I want to exercise even more.
Okay, I'll go next. So the question is, do I feel I have a seat at the table? Now I do, but it took a while to get there, and it took a lot of learning as an individual, as a professional, and it also took a lot of effort and finding where those doors were, you know, and who do I had to be like really strategic, you know. Not only my education and proving, like I think we mentioned this earlier, proving that you are a professional, that you are knowledgeable in what you do. That was like the first step, you know, like I am knowledgeable in what I'm doing, and these are the outcomes, these are the results, and, you know, and then based on that, not being shy and advocating for yourself. And I would, like a clear example, I would be teaching in my classroom, and I was that one teacher that would probably hold my ESL class in the park, like on the, not the park, sorry, the outside of the classroom, where we would go to the little pond that we had, or, you know, the playground, or we would sit, you know, we would do things that were not ordinary, and we were doing videos and we were doing podcasts, and this was a long, long time ago. And so I strategically did that so that I was visible. And then when you become visible, then it's like one step. Then your voice can be heard. And talking to leadership a lot and showing them, intentionally going and showing them what I was doing. And I'm here because at this position, and this is an honest to goodness story, I literally called every day to see if I could get this job, to the point that the secretary, till this day, she still jokes about it. But I really felt like in this position, I would be really impactful for, like I mentioned earlier, to the end goal, which is improving the lives of our students and helping them be better learners. So that's my story. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot something. I've been an immigrant twice. I'm originally from Colombia, and then I went to and lived in Argentina for many years. I got my teaching degree there. Then I moved to the States. So I've been as an immigrant into different countries, and that was an experience on itself. So.
Wow.
Oh, go ahead, Santi. I could.
Okay. Do I feel like I have a seat at the table? Thankfully, I do. Right. So as an EdTech consultant, I'm at a school because people are looking for my input. So thankfully, I have that role. And I think our friend Jason had a really interesting comment here. He wrote something about voice. Yeah. Even if you're at the table, is your voice recognized? I think that's a great point to highlight. I would add to that, even if you have a seat at the table, it doesn't mean that you're using your voice or you're taking advantage of that seat. So as somebody who feels like they have a seat at the table, I try to push myself to make sure I am advocating for the students and for diversity, just so I'm not wasting that seat. Because it doesn't end at being at the table, right? You need to always continue to advocate and bring more people to it. And I think it's important to know that it's not the end to be in the room. Yeah, you need to keep on working through that.
And I think my response to this question about having a seat at the table kind of echoes what everybody else said. I think that for a while, I didn't feel like I had it. And I think that was due to me being really new to the profession, really young when I started teaching, and inexperienced. I didn't know that I had something of value to put into these conversations. Now, that changed when leadership invested in me, when my administrators and my colleagues invested in me. It's, Alicia, you have good ideas. And then I reciprocated by sharing with them, this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I love about science teaching. This is, where my strengths are. These are the conferences that I'd like to, try and attend, or these are the books that I'm reading. And if you see opportunities about this, can you help me? And so it really all began with the relationship that I had with my first principal here. And it's continued with the principal I have now, where I can sit down and talk about where I'm at as an educator and what I want. And then they know that. And then now they know, okay, this is something that Alicia will want to be a part of. Because for a while, I kind of just came in and did my job and lesson planned and graded, but I wasn't really opening up my educational passions to the community that I was in. And then when I kind of let my guard down and got more confident in my teaching and where I was, I started to voice more of my, ideas, and that helped me to get invited to these seats at the table. And now in my district, I do feel like I have a seat at the table, and it's very empowering. But I remember how shy and quiet, and I just kind of kept to myself in the beginning. And so I think that the relationship piece is huge. That if leaders or even your coworkers know that you might not be someone who speaks up to have the seat at the table, that get to know those people a little bit more, because they do have stuff to share. They just might be a little bit scared to share it, and that's how I was for a while. And now I feel more compelled to use my voice and use my experience as an educator and support students that way.
And I would say for my situation, do I now have a seat at the table? Yes and no. Because it depends in my life and the different roles in teacher, librarian, district level admin and all that I've played. I feel like there've been many different types of tables, and even in my life right now, there's different tables, and I feel like I have a seat at some and I don't have a seat at others. And I've also had situations where I had the seat at the table and it was a horrible garbage table, and I just needed to run away from it. I didn't want a seat at that table anymore. Because part of that is because my voice was not being heard, and I felt like an add-on. I was just there, just kind of sitting on a stump. So I feel like, kind of echoing what you guys said, that even if you have a seat at the table, if your voice is not being heard and you don't feel valued and you're wondering every day, why am I here? Then that's just not enough. It's not enough. And if you're at a table and the people at the table with you are not people that you want to associate with, or corrupt or whatever, then you need to question yourself, is it worth being at that table? And that's something that I definitely have had to do in my career. Is it worth me being at this table? Am I really bringing anything to this table? And then I have to go and hop and go find another table. But having the confidence to do that, and having the confidence to know your worth, and know that, you know what, I'm not being heard here. This is not where I can make an impact. I need to go find another table or just build my own. And I think that has been a challenge, especially for me being an introvert, even though I'm an extrovert in work and things like that. It's challenging. It's challenging to get up from the table when you know you fought so hard to get there, but when you know that you don't have a voice there, sometimes you have to leave. So that has happened to me. So right now, I do feel like I have a seat at some tables. I feel like some tables I'm on the outskirts of the seats, like I'm behind somebody else. It's kind of looking like, what can I do to sit at this table? I'm close to it, but I'm not truly there to make decisions. I'm close, but not there just yet. And then at other ones, like Educator Alexander, I built my own table. So I'm at that, I'm in charge of that table. I'm sitting on top of the table with that. So it just depends on, for my life, certain things in my life, I'm at the table, and certain things I'm not.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, I want to comment on something you just said about being sometimes the only person of color at the table, and how much pressure that might feel. And, you know, how that may prevent us from talking up, because if you're the only person of color in the room, and you may feel like everything that I say is really important, so maybe I won't say anything at all. I don't want to mess this up. Yeah. So I think having more people who look like you at the table also helps with speaking up and being able to say your piece.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, I mean, to our allies out there, understanding that just because somebody has a specific ethnic or racial background does not mean that they represent that monolith, right? I think as an Asian American, there exists this thing called the model minority myth, where, you know, it's this perception that Asians are good, they're the model minority, where in reality, you know, there's a lot of diversity within the Asian American groups. There are a lot of groups that don't have education, who are poor, and I think it's very important to, not have assumptions.
Okay. Does anyone want to say any last comment before we go to question and answers? Okay. Lauren, do you want to?
Perfect. Yeah. Thank you all so much for that initial conversation. And I know we answered a lot of questions in the chat as they came up, and had a lot of really good discussions today. But please, anyone, leave any additional questions in the chat. We have a couple of minutes of our experts' time here to talk a little bit more.
And while we're waiting for questions, I hate to put you on the spot, but while we're waiting for them to come in, Santi, can you talk something about, you brought up at a meeting that we're at, about the uncolonization of the mind. I think that's what you called it. Can you just speak a little bit to that while we're waiting for questions? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but I loved it so much. It stuck with me.
So I was at a conference, and one of my colleagues there, an immigrant from Sudan, had this amazing comment, and he talked about this idea of decolonizing the mind, which I myself am still trying to wrap my mind around. So ethnically, I'm Thai and Filipino, and if we look at the history of the Philippines, it's been colonized by the Spanish for 400 years, for America for a long time. And how does that affect how I look at myself as a person, as an American? Where do my standards lie? You know, I think as people of color, we see beauty in a certain, you know, there's this standard of beauty, there's a standard of leadership, and how does that permeate our mind, and how does that relate to ourselves as people. Like, there's a reason why many people of color don't believe they belong at the table, right? Because we grow up to not see people who look like us in boardrooms or in leadership roles, and so that affects us. And I think this is part of this idea of decolonizing the mind, which I myself am still working on.
Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Okay, are there any authentic team building activities you do with your staff to help develop the culture of inclusiveness or inclusion?
Well, so in the spaces that I work in, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Center X here at UCLA, but they have this fantastic training called Cognitive Coaching and Adaptive School Strategies. And whenever, I do any work with groups of people, I always make sure to use specific strategies where everyone's voice is heard. I remember I was sitting at a meeting, I say this example over and over again, where I saw someone facilitating the meeting, asked a question, there was no dialogue, no conversation. There was a couple of hands that went up and the individual said, okay, that's a unanimous vote. Let's move on to the next thing. And I was saying to myself, wow, what if there are questions? What if there were some people who had some, not sure of what was going on, needed some clarifications, they didn't have a chance or space to have a dialogue. So I think it's very important when we talk about inclusion. That includes inclusion of voice. And I may not want to talk about my concerns in a group of 50 teachers, but if I'm talking with 3 teachers here, I can talk about my trepidations in that group. So I think it's important that we foster dialogue, we foster inclusion, and we foster spaces where people can talk about issues and bring those issues up to the forefront.
Okay. Anyone else want to tackle that question? I'm not seeing any more questions. I know Siobhan, I'm hoping I'm saying your name right. She likes to do surveys or discussion boards to get the quiet ones to talk. And I like that Peggy brought up introverts, because it is different. I'm definitely an introvert, so it is something different that you have to deal with. What is the resource for cognitive coaching you mentioned? Can you put it in the chat, Tutul?
Yeah, I just did.
Oh, he just put it in the chat.
Yeah, it's Center X out here at UCLA. They do a bunch of trainings. I don't know if they just do here in California, Peggy. I don't remember what part of the country that you're in, but they do a bunch of these. I think they do stuff around the country. They do cognitive coaching and they do adaptive school trainings. And so I'm sure if you look them up online, I don't have the resource on hand, but if you did a search on them, they would come up. And if you hit me up later, I can probably get you in contact with some folks.
Another strategy I've used to build relationships with students, because I'm reading that question and I feel like how we get to know our students is the same way as leaders can get to know their teachers. And a few years ago at our school, we did a strength-based sort of PD, where everyone took the Strength Finder assessment, and everyone came out, all teachers and students at our site came out with the 5 strengths that they had. And then our whole day, so for one whole day at our school, everybody was diving into their strengths, dissecting their strengths, getting to know more about themselves and sharing with other people. And then for that year, it was really powerful because our conversations as colleagues and our conversations with kids were all centered around, well, what's your number one strength? And so for me, my number one strength is relator. And so when they found out that I was relator, I was like, okay, it's probably why I find it very easy to understand and relate to, an 8th grader, but my number 2 strength is achiever, right? Which can sometimes get me into trouble because I'll be sitting in a meeting and I just wanted to get it done right away. And I'm like, well, what's the point of this? Can we just get an action plan and let's get going? I have a very scientific brain. But right away, my colleagues were like, oh, Alicia, we get why you're so type A, because your number one strength, is achiever. And so I think that it's that getting to know you piece, whether it's a strength finder assessment, whether it's a learning style assessment, whether it's just like sitting and talking and figuring out like, hey, this is what I'm really good at and this is where I struggle. I think that's where you build those like very authentic, meaningful, genuine relationships with people. So any way that you can get people to talk and share about themselves, I think allows for more time for people to get to know each other and get to where you want to in these meetings.
Yeah, I agree so much with what Alicia is saying, this idea of just understanding someone, just seeing them as a person, right? So at one of the schools I work with, they participate in restorative circles where, students and teachers sit in a small group and they discuss what's going on with them, what's happening outside of school, what's really bothering them. And I feel like that's something that a lot of schools don't necessarily focus on. They might not make time for it, but I think it's incredibly important, and that, I know the question is about an icebreaker, but I think this goes beyond it. When people talk about what's going on outside of school, you see that person in a different light, in a fuller sense. And it doesn't matter what they look like on the outside. I mean, you can find something that you can relate with. So yeah, it goes back to just really understanding someone and building time for that.
So we have one final question, and that is, how do you handle microaggressions from colleagues when you are in a leadership role, as some may view you as the token and not being there because of merit?
So I think I've switched on this. I used to say, well, it is what it is. You maybe talk to the person on the side, whatever. But I think you have to bring it up and call it for what it is. If it's a microaggression, you let folks know that it is what it is and address it on the spot. Because I think, folks don't realize that people are throwing microaggressions at you. And even though you're being gracious and being fabulous, as Shavin, I hope I'm saying your name right. I think sometimes, though, you got to kind of let that come up and address it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone else want to answer this one before we wrap up?
I was just going to say, I don't know if we have a second, that actually that happened to me. And so my reaction at the time was similar to what Tul just said. I stood up and I just said something about it. I was very polite about it. And my comment to that person came from me placing myself in a position where I would give him the benefit of the doubt and thinking of, that comment just came out of ignorance, mm-hmm. And I think it was taken very well because it came from that perspective from me. So it didn't feel like it was another aggression from me to him. I hope that makes sense.
And I've dealt with that when I was in a leadership position in the district. And, at first I did let it go. I was a new leader, my first time being a leader officially, and I just didn't really know how to handle it. I think eventually I spoke up about it, especially one-on-one with that person. And then eventually I had to write that person up. So it just had to get to that level. So I think sometimes, it depends on how much it progresses.
Yeah, I want to shout out Albert's response here in the chat. Silence can be viewed as acceptance. I think that's a wonderful piece that he shared with us. It relates to this idea that sometimes you don't want that seat at the table, but you need it, right? Sometimes you don't want to speak up, but you have to. And I've been in that situation also. So I think that's a great piece from Albert there.
Okay, so Lauren, we are going to throw it back to you.
All right, thank you all so much. And thank you to all of our attendees here for joining us today. And of course, thank you to our wonderful panel. This is a really important conversation, and I'm glad that you are all here to join us and have this with our audience and our members. And I hope everyone will take it back to their own schools and their own workplaces and their own lives and continue to act on it and to think about it. Again, this presentation has been recorded and the archived link will be shared out via email and on ISTE.org. And as we wrap up, I want to send everyone over to a little survey linking in the chat. I encourage you to complete this survey as it provides us with some valuable information about how to continually improve our webinars and also gives us insight on the types of topics you're interested in learning about. And just thank you all one more time. I hope to see you again at next week's ISTE Expert webinar, which is Physical Computing for All with Scratch 3.0, Microbits, Makey, and Circuit Playground. And I will include a link to that in the chat as well. All right, and so thank you all.
Bye.